Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. I never believed a single box, tucked away in the darkest corner of my attic, could hold the key to everything I thought I knew about my family. But at 60, I opened that box, and what I found inside changed my entire life. Vera. For the better part of 4 decades, I thought I'd settled into a comfortable rhythm. My husband, Richard, and I had 2 grown kids, a couple of grandkids, a modest home on the outskirts of town. Our days flowed with a predictable calm. Sunrise coffee in the kitchen, quiet afternoons reading or gardening, and gentle nights dozing off in front of the TV. It was easy to assume life held no more dramatic surprises. That was before the afternoon I ventured into the attic to clear out old junk. Richard was busy at his workshop, tinkering with his usual carpentry projects, so I was alone, rummaging through dusty trunks and abandoned suitcases. I expected to find little more than old clothes and leftover holiday decorations. But my attention was drawn to a battered cardboard box I didn't recognize. It had no label, just some faint handwriting that was too faded to read. Curious, I pried it open. Inside I found letters, dozens of them, bound together with a piece of twine. Each was addressed to my mother, Jane Carter, postmarked from the early 1960s. My heart skipped a beat at seeing my mother's maiden name. She'd passed away years ago, but I'd always believed I knew everything about her. She was a devoted housewife, quiet but warm, and fiercely protective of me, her only daughter. I lifted one letter carefully, scanning the words. They were from a man named Frank Adams, an unfamiliar name. Reading with a pounding heart, I discovered they spoke of longing, of stolen time, of quiet passion. My mother had apparently carried on a correspondence with this man for years. I skimmed, tears threatening, as he wrote lines like, "I miss the way your laughter lights up a room, and one day I hope we can truly be together." That alone was a shock. I'd never known my mother was capable of such secrecy. But the real blow came in a later letter, referencing a child. "If she ever asks where she came from, I hope you'll find the strength to tell her the truth." It felt as if the air had left the room. Child. The timeline in these letters matched perfectly with my birth year. Was Frank implying that I might be his daughter? For a moment my vision blurred. My father, George Carter, had raised me lovingly, always there for me, a quiet anchor in my life until his passing. Could it be that he wasn't my biological father? My mind reeled, dread and confusion knotting my stomach. I read letter after letter, piecing together a heartbreaking story. Frank and my mother had been in love. She'd married George under family pressure, but her heart belonged to Frank. At some point, my mother discovered she was pregnant, uncertain if George or Frank was the father. The letters suggested Frank believed I was his. My mother seemed to have agreed, yet chose to remain silent for the sake of preserving her marriage's reputation. She never told me a word about any of this. Those final lines repeated in my head. "If she ever asks where she came from, I hope you'll find the strength to tell her." The attic spun. I sank to the floor, tears streaming, clutching the letters to my chest. I was 60, for heaven's sake. Why uncover this now? My mother and father were gone, never to answer my questions. And what about Richard? My husband, the man who believed my entire family tree was as straightforward as I'd always claimed. Would he see me differently if my father wasn't who we thought he was? Eventually, I gathered the letters and retreated downstairs, my thoughts in chaos. That evening, Richard found me on the couch, tear-stained, reading the last of those old correspondences. Alarmed, he asked what was wrong, but I struggled to find words. I handed him a letter, trembling. He read it, eyes widening. Then he set it aside and pulled me close. "We'll figure this out," he whispered, though I doubted even he knew how. The following days were a blur of searching for traces of Frank Adams. His address on the envelopes was in a nearby city. After some hesitant phone calls to old friends of my mother's, some still living, others who'd passed, I discovered fragments of the story. How Frank had been my mother's teenage sweetheart, how their families disapproved. They parted ways, but the flame never fully died. Eventually, she'd chosen George for stability, yet kept writing to Frank in secret. And apparently I might be the result of that secret. My heart pounded every time I replayed that possibility. A swirl of emotions threatened to drown me. Anger at my mother for lying, sorrow for my father who might never have known, confusion about my own identity. Richard urged me to consider a DNA test if I could find Frank or any living relatives of his. But decades had passed. Where would I even begin? A glimmer of hope emerged when an old acquaintance from my mother's hometown recalled hearing that Frank had moved out west. I scoured social media, genealogical sites, and after countless dead ends, found a possible lead. A Frank Adams Jr. living 2 states away. My stomach churned. Could he be related to my mother's Frank? Richard, unwaveringly supportive, suggested I write a letter. Nothing too pushy, he said gently. Just enough to see if he's connected. My hands shook as I typed out the possibility that my mother might have known his father. I included a few details from the letters, hoping it wouldn't sound insane. Then I mailed it off, not sure if I wanted a reply or dreaded one. Days turned into weeks with no word. I tried to resume normal life. Grocery shopping, babysitting my grandkids, crocheting blankets, but I felt numb, always checking the mailbox with a pounding heart. Finally, an envelope arrived, bearing a return address I recognized. Frank Adams Jr. He wrote that his father had indeed lived in that city, and he recalled once hearing about a woman named Jane Carter from his father's old diaries. Jr. was curious, uncertain, but open to meeting. He also mentioned his father had passed away a decade ago. My heart sank, so Frank was gone. I'd never be able to ask him face to face if I was his daughter. But maybe there was some closure to be found with his son, if he still had anything of Frank's that could help. We arranged a meeting at a cafe halfway between our cities. I arrived early, nerves tangling. Richard came with me for moral support. When Junior walked in, my breath caught. He looked older than me by a handful of years, with the same jaw shape I saw in the old letters pictures of Frank. We exchanged polite greetings, each scanning the other's face for any sign of familiarity. Over a pot of coffee, I explained the letters, my mother's situation. He listened intently, nodding, occasionally glancing at Richard as if to gauge how we both felt. Then came the part one dreaded. I asked if he had anything. Hairbrush, old hat, something with Frank's DNA for a potential test. He gave a sad smile. I don't have that. But I do have an old photo album, and some diaries Dad kept in his final years. Maybe there's a mention of Jane's baby. My heart fluttered. If his diaries confirmed I was Frank's child, that would change everything. Junior invited us to his home to see those diaries, and though the idea of rummaging through a dead man's private thoughts felt intrusive, I knew this was the only chance to find answers. A week later, Richard and I drove out to Junior's place. The diaries were stacked on a wooden coffee table. I opened one carefully, scanning for any reference to Jane or a child. My pulse hammered as page after page revealed a man haunted by regret. Frank wrote of a love he lost, a child he suspected was his. He referenced sending letters, praying for a day they might be together. I saw entries from around my birth year, speaking of intense longing, how Jane had promised to keep him updated, but then cut off contact. He wrote, "She says the baby is better off with her husband, but it kills me not knowing." Tears splashed onto the diary's yellowed pages as I realized this man had carried a lifetime of grief for a daughter he never met. The final pages repeated the same question. Did I have a daughter out there? Emotion welled up in me, a swirl of heartbreak, pity, and an unexpected pang of love for a man I'd never known, who might well have been my father. When I turned the last page, a wave of sorrow crashed over me. There was no definitive statement. She is my daughter. But everything pointed that way. I was left with little doubt. I mustered the courage to ask Junior if we could do a genealogical DNA test ourselves. Perhaps enough of Frank's line would show to confirm me as kin. He agreed and we submitted samples. The result was overwhelming. High probabilities that I was Frank's biological child, meaning Junior was my half-brother. The news stunned me, though part of me had expected it. I felt as though my identity was ripping at the seams. For 60 years, I'd believed George Carter was my father. He'd raised me with quiet kindness, never showing a hint of doubt. Did he ever suspect? Did my mother lie to him too, or did he choose not to ask? So many questions would remain forever unanswered now that both were gone. Richard helped me process, hugging me tight whenever I was on the verge of tears. Our children took the news with a mix of curiosity and compassion. "So we have another branch of the family," they teased, trying to lighten the mood. Meanwhile, I found solace in the knowledge that I had a half-brother in Junior, someone who also felt the sting of losing time, who'd grown up hearing only fragments about his father's lost love. We found a strange comfort in each other's presence, comparing notes on Frank. He told me about the father who taught him to fish, who always seemed a bit melancholy around the date that matched my birth month. I shared the mother who must have held me close while longing for someone else. Together, we knitted together a tapestry of a love story that ended tragically for both of them. Finally, I faced a question. Should I keep this a secret from the rest of my extended family, or proclaim it openly? Some might judge my mother's choices, or question my entire life narrative. Richard pointed out that secrets only breed more secrets. So I held a small gathering, inviting close family. With trembling voice, I explained how I discovered old letters, how I'd tested my DNA, how it turned out my father wasn't George biologically, but the love from decades past, Frank Adams. Tears welled up in multiple eyes, but so did acceptance. My children hugged me, grateful for my honesty. My cousins murmured supportive words. The real father I'd known, George, would remain the dad who raised me, they said. But at least now I had the truth, and a new half-brother if I chose to embrace him. And I did. Junior and I began texting frequently, sharing photos of our families, our daily routines. He visited for a barbecue, meeting my children and grandchildren. It felt odd calling him my half-brother, but we found a sense of belonging in each other's company, a bond we'd never expected so late in life. We even visited Frank's grave together one cloudy afternoon, my first time there. I placed a small bouquet, tears sliding down my cheeks. Junior softly said, "He never stopped missing you, even if he never knew you." I closed my eyes, imagining the father I'd never get to meet in person, but whose presence I felt in the diaries, the letters, and now in this newly discovered family tie. It gave me a sense of closure, a quiet peace that overshadowed the heartbreak. Late in life, yes, but love can echo across time, in ways we never anticipate. Looking back, the idea that everything changed at 60 might sound dramatic, but it's true. One battered box in my attic led me to reevaluate my entire origin story, bridging decades of secrecy. Sometimes the hardest truth is better than a comforting lie, because in truth we find a chance to grow. I realized life can still surprise you no matter your age. And it can surprise you in ways that add richness and depth to your journey, even if it also adds heartbreak. If you're listening to my story, and you sense there are secrets hidden in your own family, I urge you, find the courage to uncover them. You might be terrified of what you'll learn, but the freedom of living in honesty outweighs the comfort of not knowing. And if, like me, you discover a new side of yourself, another father, another sibling, an entire chapter you never wrote, embrace it. Because it's never too late to shape your future from the truths of your past. Thank you for joining me on this emotional ride. If anything here resonated with you, please like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more real-life stories that remind us it's never too late for life to rewrite itself. Who knows? Maybe your next chapter is waiting in a dusty box, just waiting to be opened.